The need for militarization. I'm sure plenty of people would say, well, why would we need to spend all of this money on new Royal Navy carriers and new dreadnoughts? This is often seen by people as a big waste of time, unproductive capital expenditure. Why is it then that Britain needs to remilitarize? What threat does Britain need to face off against?
So we face on the traditional enemy of Russia, and Russia is about to become very wealthy through this next commodity cycle. So just if you had a single polar world with Russia and Europe, how we cope with Russia is a critical part of it. And rapprochement has to be the only solution. If we could have worked with Stalin, as we did do by need to combat Germany in the Second World War, Putin isn't Stalin, he's a far lesser version. He's tricky, he's difficult. There are lots of things which are in opposition to the concepts of democracy. But actually rapprochement now is strategically the only route, because he faces a problem too. He doesn't want to be the only country sitting next to his ally, potentially China in the future. See the West disappear and know he's next, because he will be. So he sits just like Stalin did on a knife edge between the West that he despised because they were capitalist and the Nazis that he doubly despised because they were his neighbors and even more so in many degrees. And he made that compromise. Putin faces a very similar process, and Western politicians have to wake up to that now is the time, because as the commodity cycle re-kicks, then there's no way he's coming back. He's alienated and his pride is well and truly pricked after the way the West treated the fall of Russia, which was despicable, to be honest. He has some rights in saying that. So we have to have really like the rapprochement that Britain made with France in 1906, recognizing Germany was the continental power to contain. We need something like the Entente Cordiale, and we need to really understand how to do that. So that's the first part. But you cannot do it from weakness. And so if Putin sees weakness, you'll never get him to the table. The only way you'll get him to the table is when he sees absolute strength that he cannot push through. And the only way we can do that is more money on defense. And for example, his submarine force is just growing and growing. We cannot protect our own waters and airspace easily. There are submarines lurking in our waters that shouldn't be there. Our deterrent is at risk. There are whole parts of this which are embarrassing, where our Navy is completely overstretched. And we do not have the facilities to combat Russia alone in our waters. So that's the first piece. And especially as Russia has invested in 6 core strategic weapons, all of which are scarily pieces of kit that we don't have counters for. So we've been caught napping, in effect. So we need it for that reason. But even if we could create the rapprochement with Russia, and we can only do that from strength, and not we're building them in 10 years, they're in the water and they're doing their job strength, China is a much bigger systematic issue. China's been in expansion since the Boxer Revolution. It is the second of the Asian empires. The first was Japan. So we have already, between a Western super empire and an Asian super empire, we've already seen the conflicts that started, for example, with Russia and Japan, and that was the beginning of it, in that particular conflict, and the Japanese were successful, note. And so China has been working in a strategic way that's difficult for Westerners to comprehend. I've spent 35 years studying Chinese martial arts. They are the most sophisticated, cunning, devious thinkers, perhaps on a kin of Britain when it gets mobilized, but in the Western world, but we're not mobilized at the moment. And so essentially they run in rings around us. They encourage the West to invest in their own demise. We still have politicians and businessmen who think they can invest in China and make money, and they are selling their children's future, which incidentally took place in Germany, and twice. There were pro-Germans into 1914. Lloyd George led the charge. He obfuscated the British response as a response. And actually, he encouraged aggression from Germany because Lloyd George's perspective was perceived by the Kaiser as one that would keep Britain out of the war when they invaded France. But they made the mistake of going through Belgium. So we've had this before. People who are blind to aggression, who see commercial advantage and portray their own societies. And we do need people to stand up and actually say that's not appropriate anymore. There's a real threat, and we've seen threat. I mean, if you go back and say, how did we not catch Germany? Oh, well, let's think about it. They had concentration camps. Yep, well, we ignored that. We just tick. Yep. They've managed to annex countries around them. Oh, tick, that's Hong Kong. They managed to subject their culture on the countries that they've, Tibet, Hong Kong, their whole independent system has disappeared. Anyone who's an individual is in prison or disappeared. It's terrifying. It's happening all over again, and yet we're happy to go and buy a Chinese model or everything from China. So we need to wake up to that threat and understand that the Chinese will only be deterred by strength, because they will move if there's an opportunity and they won't move if there's deterrence. So our strength comes through deterrence, and we need to wake up and make sure that happens. And in a world where America is weakening, America's like this old, powerful man that's now in a Zimmer frame with, you know, lots of money and lots of influence, but doesn't use it wisely. Britain is the energy that can shore that up, but we need the intention and the manifest to do it. And what people don't realize is global Britain has set us head to head with the Chinese, because the Chinese are expansive and Britain is now expansive in global. So whether we like it or not, we're going head to head with the Chinese. We can't avoid it, and we need to prepare for it.